You should care about how do we make poor people rich, not how do we make rich people poorer so that everybody's at the same level. Because that's just you being jealous. That's just you not liking the guy's house next door because it's bigger than your house. And look at that, he has a big house, I have a smaller house. Maybe I'll just go rob his place.
If it happens to be that this process of competition improves more lives, great. But that is not a priority when it comes to market logic.
The violent revolution becomes of primary value to the communists to the extent to which it can be used to condition the masses psychologically to accept the non-violent revolution, which is offered supposedly as the only alternative.
Take a look back and see whether the moves that Lenin took and that Trotsky supported him in taking and that they both advocated had anything to do with socialism as it was understood by, say, in the Marxist tradition or in the left libertarian tradition. And I think the answer that you'll discover when you look at that is that they didn't. In fact, this was a destruction of socialist institutions. Well, you know, this may be true or it may be false, but if it's true, and I think the evidence pretty strongly supports it, then I don't see any reason why we shouldn't express that fact. And I certainly don't think that we should be deterred in expressing this fact if other people who's, you know, fascists or whatever, happen to condemn the Soviet Union, just for the same reasons that Trotsky mentioned in the 1930s.
Hoping to avoid further violence and bloodshed, the public is to be pressured into accepting measures that will move the country gradually and legally toward communism, but without calling it that. The strategy of the proletarian revolution calls for the quiet conversion of our government into a communist regime, but under the banner of socialism. Well, what is socialism? All right, let's define it. According to the dictionary, socialism is a political concept based upon the principle of government ownership and control of property, the means of production, and the avenues of commerce.
If you look at the facts. Now, why is it called socialism? Well, I think that's complicated and we should look at it. There's the Soviet Union calls it socialism. And, you know, after they took control of they did take control pretty soon of most of the international socialist movement because primarily of the prestige of having created something sort of socialism. Incidentally, just a side remark, Lenin remained, despite it all, a sort of an orthodox Marxist in many respects.
When you see around the globe the maldistribution of wealth...
Chris Gardner, how are you? Good morning.
The desperate plight of millions of people in underdeveloped countries, when you see so few haves and so many have-nots...
Chris Gardner, I've been sitting out there for the last half hour trying to come up with a story that would explain my being here dressed like this.
The new law of evolution in corporate America seems to be survival of the unfittest. Well, in my book, you either do it right or you get eliminated.
When you see the greed and the concentration of power within, did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism?
In the last 7 deals that I've been involved with, there were 2.5 million stockholders who have made a pre-tax profit of $12 billion. Thank you.
What I'm worried about. Yeah, how about those people in poverty on food stamps and out of work? Why don't we worry about them?
No, but there's a connection.
Did you ever get a job from a poor person?
Well, it depends on what the poor person was doing.
Name one time in your life you got a job from somebody that has no money.
Well, didn't have no money. I worked at McDonald's for a number of years, and the person who ran McDonald's didn't have too much money. No, when I'm talking about the person who was a manager who just
okay, not the manager, the owner of
you mean the owner of things? No, but
you didn't get a job.
No, but see, this is where your faith in capitalism that is unfettered is different than my critique of capitalism that believes that the priority ought to be on poor and working people.
We just had an experiment with socialism, redistribution, spreading the wealth around, and what did we have? Millions more in poverty, millions more in food stamps. Why can't you understand socialism, redistribution does not work?
I am not a destroyer of companies. I am a liberator of them.
But that is what, in fact, makes man a sacrificial animal. That man must work for others, concern himself with others, or be responsible for them. That is the role of a sacrificial object. I say that man is entitled to his own happiness and that he must achieve it himself, but that he cannot demand that others give up their lives to make him happy. And nor should he wish to sacrifice himself for the happiness of others. I hold that man should have self-esteem.
Well, I haven't spent a lot of time reading Rand. I found her novels more or less unreadable. And I've read some of her essays. I've read some of her interviews. My basic issue with her ethics is that she seemed not to understand that pro-social emotions, like compassion.
And cannot man have self-esteem if he loves his fellow man? What's wrong with loving your fellow man? Christ, every important moral leader in man's history, has taught us that we should love one another. Why, then, is this kind of love, in your mind, immoral?
Compassion were a real source of well-being, even for, quote, selfish people.
It is immoral if it is a love placed above oneself. It is more than immoral, it's impossible.
This stark opposition between selfishness, that she thought was rational, and altruism, that she thought was delusional or masochistic, that I think is psychologically untrue and ethically unhelpful.
Because when you are asked to love everybody indiscriminately, that is, to love people without any standard, to love them regardless of the fact of whether they have any value or virtue, you are asked to love nobody.
But in a sense, in your book, you talk about love as if it were a business deal of some kind.
I think a wisely selfish person more and more begins to recognize that he or she is committed to the happiness of other people and is right to be.
Isn't the essence of love that it is above self-interest?
What would it mean to have love above self-interest? It would mean, for instance, that a husband would tell his wife, if he were moral, according to the conventional morality, that I am marrying you just for your own sake. I have no personal interest in it, but I am so unselfish that I am marrying you only for your own good.
Well, should husbands and wives
Would any
tally up?
woman like that?
That their happiness redounds to his own happiness. Okay, that is a more mature, a more enlightened form of ethics than any I've ever heard Rand espouse. And it's also more enlightened and mature than I tend to hear fans of Rand espouse. So,
should husbands and wives tally up at the end of the day and say, well, now wait a minute, I love her if she's done enough for me today.
Whatever Rand herself believed,
or she loves me if I have properly performed my functions.
Those who are drawn to her philosophy often strike me as malignantly selfish.
No, you misunderstood me. That is not how love should be treated.
And unillumined by a larger picture of just how good life could become.
I agree with you that it should be treated like a business deal, but every business has to have its own terms and its own kind of currency. And in love, the currency is virtue.
Right, if we also saw that we were in this together.
You love people not for what you do for them or what they do for you. You love them for the values, the virtues which they have achieved in their own character. You don't love causelessly. You don't love everybody indiscriminately. You love only those who deserve it.
And then if a man is weak or a woman is weak, then he is beyond love?
He certainly does not deserve it. He certainly is beyond. He can always correct it. Man has free will.
Still, you didn't pick its influence on you.
Right.
You didn't. Like, why were you influenced to that degree and not a lesser degree? Or why weren't you influenced oppositely? Why didn't the fact that you had seen a documentary on him make you think, well, I can't pick Brando because, I've just been thinking about him all week long. I'm going to go with Chris Rock, right? All of this is mysterious. It never becomes unmysterious.
Yeah.
No matter how full an account you can give of it. And it's all being produced by the machinery of your genome and your neurophysiology and all of its influences over which you have absolutely no control. And every moment where you decide to assert control, like let's say you feel like you don't have enough discipline in your life, and you wake up tomorrow morning and you think, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start working out. I'm going to cut sugar out of my diet. I'm going to really get a handle on all of these problems, right? Where does that come from?
If a man wants love, he should correct his weaknesses or his flaws, and he may deserve it, but he cannot expect the unearned, neither in love nor in money.
But let me tell you this. what has happened in the last 40 years is a massive redistribution of wealth from poor and working people to the well-to-do. When 25 years ago, the top 1% had about 28% of the wealth. Today, they got about 42% of the wealth. You know that's redistribution upward.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
What I want.
Okay.
And this is where people ask, well, how are we good friends? We're good friends for this reason, because we have the same goal here. We want...
Greed is right.
I am sick and tired of having...
Greed works.
The lowest labor participation rate, 50 million Americans in poverty, 43 million Americans on food stamps.
Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit.
And more because of Obama's policies. And you got a president now.
Well, it's not just Obama. It was Bush, it was Clinton, it goes all the way down.
Well, let's talk about the president. We got a president now that is doing everything he can do to get rid of regulations, lower taxes, to help businesses invest, build factories, manufacturing centers, and the pipes for the pipeline.
Greed in all of its forms. Greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind, and greed.
And I would think Cornel West says, that's awesome, because those people need jobs.
You mark my words, will not only save Teldar paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA.
And whether greed's a good idea to run on?
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed?
Well, this is why human behavior has to be understood, which is another very important point that we need to
I mean, and I disagree with you that humans are fundamentally, don't have competition in them.
Okay, well,
I mean, of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy.
And that is all over the animal kingdom. That is the name of the game.
Sure, but why? Why does the animal kingdom have this?
Because of resources.
So a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study, very well known. It has now been done with dogs and with birds and with chimpanzees, but we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group, they know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. There's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. It's perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, it's a far better food. Then you create inequity between them.
Exactly.
But also because of the design in our development within that system of competition, it is to deny how we were developed and what we have been developed to do.
Political belief is determined in large part by temperament and personality, and that's very strongly biologically influenced.
Well, I would have to respectfully disagree with that because there's no basis for that. Everything that we have that we think is derived naturally as far as human instinct. Every form of human instinct that you see popularized by the modern-day alchemists, the geneticists that say, they can find the genetic gene for smoking or the genetic gene to be a Republican.
So conservatives tend to be lower in openness, which is a trait associated with creativity, and higher in conscientiousness, which is a trait associated with industriousness and orderliness. They tend to make good managers and administrators and lawyers. They tend to make good conservative business types. That's their forte, that's their niche, and that's a valid place to be and a valid thing to be. And, conservatives aren't so good at being entrepreneurial, and they're not so good at being artistic and creative. That's not their niche. That's more the niche of the liberal end of the spectrum. And as far as I'm concerned, for the political system to function properly, you need proper representation for all the temperamental types, and they need to be engaged in dialogue.
This is completely ignoring basically everything that the environment has been teaching us.
Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And see, each of the other one sees that. C gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber.
For example, if you were taken as a little baby, infant, brought over to the Middle East, dropped off into a family that was Muslim, you would be on the air right now speaking Arabic, praising Allah, and you'd have a show called Info Jihad. It's completely arbitrary to the extent. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't kernels of elements in our lives that dictate we want to live.
Well, wait a minute. It's not kernels. Conservatively, more than half of our activities in motion is genetic and nature, and then nurture is the variant that will change for the time and place and culture how your genetic information manifests.
She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
The world runs on individuals pursuing their separate interests.
Everything that we understand has been taught to us in some capacity, especially our operations. Every word I'm saying has been taught to me. Every concept has been relayed in some capacity to me, and through my mental operations, which is a form of conditioning, I have arrived at novel conclusions. My originality is simply because of the environmental influences that are completely and utterly conditioned to me as opposed to everyone else. Everyone is different because they come from different conditioning, in other words. This is extremely powerful, and it's not 50-50. It's probably 90-10. Our conditioning is everything, and when we realize that the monetary system...
Hold on, we're going back to the full audience. Here we go.